You know what's funny about military academies? They're supposed to prepare you for the unexpected. But nobody at the Galactic Military Academy on Nexus Prime was prepared for Jane. Commander Vex, a 7-foot-tall Krillian with mandibles that could crack titanium, ran his tactical warfare class like clockwork. Same routine every day. Alien cadets from 12 different species, all eager to prove themselves worthy of the Galactic Defense Force. Row upon row of perfectly aligned desks, each occupied by future officers who'd spent their entire lives dreaming of this moment. And then there was Jane, human, quiet, sitting in the back corner like she was waiting for a bus instead of attending the most prestigious military academy in 3-star systems. Today we'll be analyzing the Battle of Meridian 7, Vex announced, his translator converting his clicking speech into standard galactic. Can anyone tell me why the Terran forces were so effective despite being outnumbered 10-1? Cadet Zip, a nervous Blitharian with tentacles that twitched when he was excited, shot his appendage into the air. Sir. Superior technology, sir. Wrong. Vex's mandibles clicked disapprovingly. Technology was nearly identical. Anyone else? The class fell silent. Well, mostly silent. If you listened carefully, you could hear this weird humming from the back corner. Not Jane humming, mind you. The equipment was humming. Her datapad, the desk's power coupling, even the lights above her seat. Everything around Jane hummed like it was nervous. Which should have been the first clue, really. The answer, Vex continued, is unpredictability. Humans don't follow standard tactical doctrine. They're chaotic. Jane made a sound. Not quite a snort, not quite a laugh. More like someone trying not to comment on a really bad joke. Several cadets turned to look at her, but she was staring out the viewport like the conversation had nothing to do with her. That was Jane's thing. She attended every class, turned in every assignment, scored perfectly on every test. But she acted like she was auditing the courses instead of actually enrolled. Like she already knew everything being taught and was just killing time. The really weird part? The equipment failures started 3 weeks after she arrived. Nothing major. A training simulator would glitch during her session. The mess hall's protein synthesizer would malfunction when she walked by. Door sensors would hesitate before opening for her, like they were asking permission first. And then there was her shadow. I don't mean that metaphorically. Jane had a literal shadow that followed her around the station. Big guy. Supposedly worked maintenance. Name tag said Rick. Always showed up wherever Jane went, fixing things that weren't broken, checking systems that were running perfectly. The alien cadets had theories, of course. Zip was convinced Jane was some kind of Terran spy. His roommate, a crystalline Vorthan named Klex, insisted she was probably just homesick, and the big maintenance guy reminded her of family. The Andromedan twins thought she might be psychic, and was accidentally affecting the electronics. None of them guessed the truth. Hell, none of them even came close. Looking back, the signs were obvious. Jane never took notes during combat strategy lectures, but she'd unconsciously nod or shake her head during Vex's explanations. She'd glance at tactical displays and immediately look away, like she was trying not to correct them. During physical training, she'd hold back just enough to seem average while moving with the kind of fluid precision that takes decades to develop. And Rick? Rick would appear every time the station's defense systems ran diagnostics. Every time. Like clockwork. Just happened to be in the right place to observe the Academy's security measures while supposedly fixing a ventilation unit. But the biggest clue? Jane never seemed surprised by anything. Not the Krillian war chants during morning formation. Not the zero-gravity combat simulations. Not even when Cadet Zip accidentally triggered a fire suppression system and flooded half the dormitory with foam. She just sat there in the back of the classroom, quiet and patient, like she was waiting for something to happen. Like she knew something the rest of us didn't. Turns out she did. Rick was the kind of maintenance worker who made you check your life insurance policy just by walking into the room. 6'6", built like a cargo hauler, with hands that looked like they could crush a plasma rifle without breaking stride. His work uniform was always perfectly clean, which was weird because maintenance workers are usually covered in grease or coolant or whatever mysterious fluids keep space stations running. The alien cadets were terrified of him. Not because he was threatening, mind you. Rick never raised his voice, never made sudden movements, never even looked at anyone directly. But something about him triggered every survival instinct evolution had given these species. Prey animals would freeze when he walked by. Predator species would unconsciously bare their teeth or extend their claws. Klex, the crystal guy, developed a theory that Rick was actually a decommissioned war android that had been repurposed for civilian duty. "Look at how he moves," Klex would whisper during meal breaks. "Too precise, too controlled, no wasted motion." Zip disagreed. "He's not artificial. He's just really, really focused. Like a Terran apex predator. You know how Earth is supposed to be this nightmare death world? Maybe that's just what their maintenance workers look like." The Andromedan twins, Vel and Kor, had their own theory. "He's Jane's bodyguard," Vel would insist. "Think about it. She's obviously someone important, and he's making sure nothing happens to her." If that's true, Kor would counter, what kind of person needs a bodyguard at a military academy? What's she hiding from? They weren't wrong exactly. Rick did show up wherever Jane went. If she was in the library, he'd be recalibrating the atmospheric processors 2 corridors away. If she was in the gymnasium, he'd be inspecting the artificial gravity generators in the next room. If she was eating lunch, he'd be checking the ventilation systems in the mess hall ceiling. The maintenance schedule Rick supposedly followed made no sense. He'd spend 3 hours adjusting perfectly functional door sensors, then ignore a genuine malfunction in the water recycling system. He'd test security cameras that had been working fine for months, but skip scheduled maintenance on critical life support equipment. Unless you realized he wasn't maintaining anything. He was mapping everything. Every sensor, every security checkpoint, every defensive hardpoint on the station. Rick was conducting the most thorough reconnaissance operation in Galactic Defense Force history. And he was doing it with a maintenance worker's access card and a toolkit that probably cost more than most planets' defense budgets. But here's the thing that should have given it away. Rick never actually fixed anything. Things around him would stop malfunctioning, sure, but not because he repaired them. Electronics would start working properly again after he walked away, like they were embarrassed about causing trouble in front of him. Commander Vex noticed, of course. Military officers don't miss details like that. But every time he tried to investigate, Rick's paperwork was perfect. Transfer orders from Earth Colonial Administration, security clearance from Terran Defense Command, even a psychological evaluation stating he was ideal for routine maintenance duties in low-stress environments. Low-stress environments. Right. The evaluation was signed by Dr. Elizabeth Warren, Chief of Psychiatric Services, Terran Military Medical Corps. Legitimate credentials, legitimate department, legitimate signature. The only problem? Dr. Elizabeth Warren had been dead for 6 years. But nobody knew that except Earth intelligence. And Earth intelligence wasn't sharing. The alien instructors started comparing notes after the 4th week. Lieutenant Quex, who taught engineering ethics, mentioned that the human female seemed unusually familiar with classified propulsion systems. Captain Mordak from Advanced Weapons Theory noted that she'd ask questions that implied knowledge of prototype armaments that weren't supposed to exist. And Professor Xylon, the ancient Centaurian who taught military history, swore he recognized her voice during a lecture about recent conflicts in the Outer Rim. "She corrected my pronunciation of a Kepler station commander's name," he told Vex privately. "But those records are sealed. The only people who would know the correct pronunciation were actually there." Vex filed a formal inquiry with Academy administration. The response came back within hours. Student records classified by order of Terran High Command. No further investigation authorized. That should have been the end of it. Should have been. But 3 days later, long-range sensors detected an incoming fleet. Hostile configuration, unknown species, moving fast toward Nexus Prime. The Academy went to full alert for the first time in its 90-year history. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Jane smiled. The attack came at 0347 station time, because apparently hostile aliens have no respect for decent sleep schedules. Red alert klaxons screaming, emergency lights bathing everything in hellish crimson, and cadets stumbling around in their underwear trying to remember their emergency protocols. Commander Vex's voice boomed through the communication system. All cadets to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The attacking fleet was unlike anything in the Galactic Defense Force database. 12 ships, each one roughly the size of a heavy cruiser, but with weapon configurations that made no tactical sense. Too many forward guns, not enough point defense, armor plating in all the wrong places. Either these aliens were complete idiots, or they knew something about space combat that the rest of the galaxy didn't. Academy defensive systems came online automatically. Force fields, particle cannons, missile batteries, the works. Nexus Prime might have been a school, but it was a military school, built to withstand anything short of a full fleet assault. The alien ships opened fire, and the Academy's shields absorbed the first barrage without even flickering. Standard plasma charges, nothing special. Vex actually relaxed a little. These unknowns might look scary, but their weapons were primitive compared to modern Galactic Defense Force technology. Then the second barrage hit, and the shields collapsed completely. What the hell? Vex's mandibles clicked frantically as he stared at the tactical display. Those were basic plasma charges. How did they penetrate our shields? The answer came from his chief engineer, a panicked Regellian whose blue skin had gone pale white. Sir, their plasma isn't standard. It's some kind of adaptive variant. It analyzes our shield frequency and adjusts accordingly. Before Vex could respond, the third barrage struck the station's hull directly. Armor plating that should have stopped heavy torpedoes crumpled like tissue paper. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut as atmosphere vented into space. Half the Academy's defensive batteries went offline in the first 30 seconds. In the cadet barracks, organized chaos had devolved into regular chaos. Alien students were running in circles, some trying to reach their emergency stations, others just trying to reach the escape pods. The few who remembered their training were attempting to establish defensive positions, but they were armed with practice weapons and limited ammunition. Cadet Zip had managed to grab a plasma rifle and was trying to organize his squad when he noticed something weird. Jane was sitting on her bunk, calmly putting on her boots. Not hurrying, not panicking, just getting dressed like she was preparing for morning inspection. Jane. Zip's tentacles were waving frantically. We need to get to the emergency stations. The Academy is under attack. She looked up at him with those unsettlingly calm eyes. I know. What? Then why aren't you moving? We need to help with the defense. Jane finished lacing her boots and stood up. For the first time since arriving at the Academy, she was paying complete attention to her surroundings. Zip. How many defensive batteries does this station have? The question caught him off guard. 48 primary batteries, 16 secondary arrays, and 8 heavy torpedo launchers. Why? Worry. And how many are still operational? Zip checked his emergency data pad, squinting at the damage report streaming across the screen. Looks like maybe 20 batteries are still firing, half the secondary arrays are down, and we've lost 6 of the torpedo launchers. Jane nodded like she'd expected that exact answer. Adaptive plasma charges. They probably scanned the station's defensive frequencies during their approach and configured their weapons accordingly. Classic preemptive strike doctrine. Classic what? How do you know that? Instead of answering, Jane walked to the barracks' central communication panel and activated the emergency channel. Her voice, when she spoke, was completely different from the quiet student they'd known. This was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed instantly. Commander Vex, this is Cadet Jane requesting permission to speak with you privately. Vex's response came back immediately, strained with stress. Not now, Cadet. We're trying to coordinate a defense. Sir, with respect, your current defensive strategy won't work. The attacking ships are using adaptive weapons technology, and they've already analyzed your tactical patterns. You need to implement irregular response protocols immediately." There was a pause. When Vex spoke again, his voice was careful. "Cadet, how exactly do you know about adaptive weapons technology?" Jane's smile was barely visible, but Zip could hear it in her voice. "Because, Commander, I've used them before." Outside, another barrage struck the Academy's hull, and more defense systems went offline. Emergency lighting flickered, and somewhere in the distance, an explosion echoed through the corridors. "Sir," Jane continued, her voice steady despite the chaos around her, "I respectfully request permission to assist with the defense of this facility." "You're a cadet. You have no combat experience." This time Jane actually laughed. It was not a comforting sound. "Commander, do you really want to bet the lives of everyone on this station on that assumption?" The silence that followed Jane's question lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Commander Vex's voice came through the comm system, and for the first time since the attack began, he sounded uncertain. "Could Jane report to the command center immediately, and bring your identification." Jane reached into her footlocker and pulled out a small metallic device that definitely wasn't standard cadet equipment. When she activated it, her entire appearance shimmered for a moment, like reality was adjusting itself. Her hair changed color, her face shifted subtly, and suddenly she looked older, much older. Zip's tentacles went rigid with shock. "What the hell was that?" "Holographic camouflage," Jane replied casually, checking the device's power level. "Pretty standard equipment, actually. Though I guess they don't teach that in basic electronics class here." She walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at the terrified alien cadets. "You might want to stay away from the observation decks for the next few hours. Things are about to get loud." The command center was in chaos when Jane arrived. Officers shouting orders, technicians frantically trying to restore defensive systems, and Commander Vex standing in the middle of it all looking like a soldier who'd suddenly realized he was completely out of his depth. "Cadet Jane reporting as requested, sir." Vex turned toward her, then stopped dead. The human standing before him wasn't the quiet student who'd sat in the back of his classroom for 6 weeks. This woman carried herself like a predator, moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd spent decades in combat zones, and had eyes that seemed to catalog every tactical detail in the room simultaneously. "Who are you?" Vex asked quietly. Jane reached into her pocket and produced a small identification chip. When Vex inserted it into his command console, the holographic display that appeared made everyone in the room go silent. "Admiral Elena Cross, Terran Defense Command. Service record, classified. Current assignment, classified. Security clearance, ultra black. Authorization code, Ghost Protocol." "Sweet merciful void," whispered the chief engineer. "You're the ghost of Kepler Station." Elena Cross, the human who'd held off an entire hegemony battle fleet with nothing but a crippled destroyer and a crew of volunteers. The tactical genius who'd turned the tide of 3 major conflicts by doing things no sane military officer would attempt. The woman whose exploits were classified so far above top secret that most people thought she was a myth. "Commander Vex," Elena said, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded fleets in combat, "I need a complete tactical readout of the attacking force, current status of all defensive systems, and a detailed schematic of the station's internal layout." Vex stared at her for a moment, then began issuing orders to his staff. Within minutes, holographic displays filled the command center with more information than Elena should have been able to process. She absorbed it all in seconds. "Interesting," she murmured, studying the enemy formation. "Orthac raiders, but with significantly upgraded technology. Someone's been teaching them new tricks." "You recognize these ships?" asked Lieutenant Quex. "I've fought the Korthak before. Brutal in close combat, but they usually rely on overwhelming numbers rather than tactical sophistication. This adaptive weapons technology isn't their style." Elena manipulated the tactical display, zooming in on the enemy vessels. "Someone else is pulling the strings here." Another barrage struck the station, and more warning lights flashed red on the status boards. Elena watched the damage reports with professional detachment. "Commander, I need you to transmit a message on emergency frequency 77 Alpha. Tell them the Ghost sends her regards and Rick should probably get up here." "Rick?" Vex looked confused. "You mean the maintenance worker?" Elena's smile was predatory. "Rick isn't a maintenance worker, Commander. He's Master Sergeant Rick Morrison, Terran Special Operations. And right now, he's probably the most dangerous person on this station." As if summoned by her words, the command center doors opened and Rick walked in. Except now he wasn't moving like a maintenance worker. He was moving like a soldier, and the toolkit he carried was definitely not standard repair equipment. Rick said, nodding to Elena. "I've finished mapping the station's defensive grid. Also took the liberty of identifying 17 critical vulnerabilities in our current position." "Good. How long until you can have countermeasures in place?" Rick glanced at the tactical display, calculating. "Give me 12 minutes and access to the primary weapons systems." Commander Vex looked back and forth between them like he was watching a tennis match. "Would someone please explain what's happening here?" Elena turned to face him, and suddenly he understood why humans had such a terrifying reputation in combat zones. "What's happening, Commander, is that Earth intelligence has been using your academy as cover for a reconnaissance mission in this sector. The attack on your station isn't random. These raiders know exactly who they're looking for." "They're after you?" "They're after us," Rick corrected. "Problem is, they just picked a fight with the two humans who wrote the book on unconventional warfare." Another explosion rocked the station, and Elena checked her chronometer. "Gentlemen, class is now in session." What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for the next century. Not because it was particularly complex or brilliant, but because it demonstrated exactly why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most terrifying warriors. Elena took control of the Academy's defense systems like she'd designed them herself. Her fingers danced across the command interface, bypassing safety protocols and reconfiguring weapons systems in ways that made the alien engineers wince. Meanwhile, Rick had disappeared into the station's maintenance tunnels with his toolkit, which turned out to contain enough military-grade explosives to level a small city. "Commander Vex," Elena said without looking up from her displays, "I need you to order all remaining defensive batteries to cease fire for exactly 90 seconds. "What? But they'll destroy us." "No, they won't. Trust me." Against every instinct he'd developed over 30 years of military service, Vex gave the order. The Academy's guns fell silent, and the attacking ships immediately moved closer, sensing an easy victory. That was their first mistake. "Rick, are you in position?" Elena spoke into her communicator. Affirmative. Charges placed on primary structural supports, secondary power couplings, and atmospheric processing centers. Standing by for your signal." "Wait for it." The Korthak ships closed to point-blank range, preparing to finish off what they assumed was a helpless target. Their formation was perfect for a standard bombardment pattern, which would have been devastating against a conventional defense. Elena Cross, however, had never been accused of being conventional. Now. The explosion that followed wasn't visible from the command center, but everyone felt it. Deep in the station's superstructure, Rick's carefully placed charges severed specific support beams and power conduits, causing an entire section of the outer hull to detach and drift away from the station. Except it wasn't just drifting. It was spinning, tumbling end over end in a precisely calculated trajectory that put it directly in the path of the lead Korthak vessel. The collision was spectacular. 12,000 tons of armored hull plating, moving at significant velocity, struck the raiders' forward shields and punched through them like they were made of tissue paper. The ship's entire forward section crumpled, and it began venting atmosphere and crew into space. "How did you calculate that trajectory?" Vex asked, staring at the tactical display in amazement. "I didn't," Elena replied calmly. "Rick did, in his head, while placing explosives in zero gravity. Before Vex could respond, Elena had redirected the station's remaining weapons to target the raiders' engines rather than their shields. Standard doctrine called for targeting weapons systems first, but standard doctrine assumed you were fighting someone who followed the rules. The Korthak raiders found themselves suddenly immobilized, their adaptive plasma weapons useless against targets they couldn't reach. That was when Elena demonstrated why Terran Defense Command had classified her service record. She turned the Academy's training facilities into weapons. The combat simulation systems, designed to create realistic battle scenarios for cadets, could generate directed energy pulses for training purposes. Elena reconfigured them to operate at full military power and aimed them at the disabled raiders. The weapons training pods, normally used for target practice, became remote-controlled missile platforms. Even the emergency beacon system was repurposed into a communications jammer that prevented the attacking ships from coordinating their response. But the masterstroke came when Rick finished his work in the maintenance tunnels. He'd done more than just place explosives. He'd also installed a series of gravity field generators throughout the station's superstructure, stolen from the Academy's artificial gravity systems. Elena, Rick's voice came through the communicator. Gravity mines are armed and ready. Understood. Activating on my mark. The remaining Korthak ships had regrouped and were attempting to withdraw when the gravity mines activated. Suddenly, space around Nexus Prime became a maze of localized gravitational fields, each one strong enough to trap a ship or tear it apart if the crew tried to escape too quickly. 2 of the raiders were caught immediately, their hulls buckling as they found themselves pulled in multiple directions simultaneously. A third managed to break free but suffered catastrophic engine damage in the process. The rest began firing wildly at targets they couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't understand. In the cadet barracks, Zip and his friends were watching the battle through the dormitory's reinforced viewports. They'd seen military actions before in their training simulations, but this was different. This wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration. "She's not fighting them," Klex whispered, his crystalline form reflecting the explosions outside. "She's teaching them a lesson." "What lesson?" asked Vel, one of the Andromedan twins. The answer came from Kor, his brother. "Don't mess with humans." Within 20 minutes of Elena taking command, the attacking fleet was either destroyed, disabled, or fleeing at maximum velocity. The Academy's defensive casualties were minimal, and most of the station's critical systems were still operational. Commander Vex stood in the command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing the aftermath of the battle, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. "Admiral Cross," he said finally, "in 30 years of military service, I've never seen anything like that." Elena was already shutting down the improvised weapon systems and returning the station's defenses to normal operation. "Commander, that wasn't even particularly creative by human standards. We were just working with limited resources." Rick emerged from the maintenance tunnels, his uniform still immaculate despite having spent the last hour crawling through service conduits and installing military hardware. "Ma-am, all systems restored to original configuration. The Academy should be fully operational within 6 hours." "Excellent. Commander Vex, I assume you'll be filing a full report on this incident?" Vex's mandibles clicked nervously. "Ah, yes, of course. Though I'm not sure anyone will believe it." Elena's smile was genuinely warm for the first time since her arrival. "Oh, they'll believe it, Commander. Earth intelligence will make sure of that." 3 days later, life at the Galactic Military Academy had returned to something resembling normal. The hull breaches had been repaired, the defensive systems were back online, and the cadets were attending classes again. But everything was different. For starters, nobody called her Jane anymore. Admiral Elena Cross, the ghost of Kepler Station, sat in the same back corner seat she'd occupied for 6 weeks. But now the alien cadets looked at her with expressions ranging from awe to barely controlled terror. The human who'd seemed so ordinary, so forgettable, had turned out to be one of the most dangerous military officers in the galaxy. Commander Vex had adjusted his curriculum accordingly. "Today we'll be discussing the concept of asymmetric warfare," he announced to the class. Admiral Cross, would you care to share your thoughts on the subject? Elena stood up, and every cadet in the room went silent. Asymmetric warfare. She began, her voice carrying easily through the classroom, is what happens when someone who plays by the rules encounters someone who writes new rules. The key to success isn't superior firepower or numbers. It's superior adaptability. She moved to the front of the classroom, and Zip noticed that she didn't walk like a student anymore. She moved like a predator who'd decided the hunting was over for now. Take our recent encounter with the Korthak raiders. They had better ships, more advanced weapons, and overwhelming numerical superiority. By every conventional metric, they should have won easily. Cadet Klex raised a crystalline appendage. But they didn't understand human tactical doctrine? They didn't understand that humans don't have tactical doctrine, Elena replied. We have tactical creativity. Every human military officer is trained to see every piece of equipment, every environmental factor, every limitation as a potential weapon or advantage. She gestured toward the viewport, where maintenance crews were still repairing battle damage. Those raiders expected us to fight like a military academy. Instead, we fought like humans. We used their expectations against them, turned our weaknesses into strengths, and improvised solutions they couldn't predict or counter. The Andromedan twins exchanged glances. Is that why Earth is considered such a dangerous military power? Vel asked. Because you don't follow standard combat protocols? Elena's laugh was genuine. Earth is considered dangerous because we're the only species that looks at an impossible situation and asks, how can we make this work? Instead of how can we survive this? After class, the alien cadets gathered in small groups, discussing what they'd learned. The conversation always came back to the same question. How had they missed the signs? She was right there, Zip muttered, his tentacles twitching with nervous energy. For 6 weeks, we sat next to one of the most famous military commanders in the galaxy, and we thought she was just another student. The scariest part, Klex added, is that Rick was mapping our entire defensive grid while we worried about equipment malfunctions. They knew everything about this station before the attack even began. The truth, which Elena had finally explained to Commander Vex in a classified briefing, was that Earth intelligence had been tracking Korthak raiders for months. The attack on Nexus Prime wasn't random. It was a test, designed to measure the effectiveness of new adaptive weapons technology that someone had been selling to hostile species throughout the Outer Rim. Elena and Rick had been inserted into the Academy to identify the source of the technology leak. The attack had forced them to reveal themselves, but it had also provided valuable intelligence about their enemy's capabilities. So what happens now? Vex had asked during the briefing. Now, Elena had replied, we follow the trail. Someone out there is arming hostile species with advanced military technology. Rick and I are going to find them and have a conversation about career choices. 2 weeks later, Elena Cross and Rick Morrison disappeared from Nexus Prime as quietly as they'd arrived. The official records showed that they'd completed their mission and been reassigned to other duties. Their classmates and instructors knew better. The ghost and her shadow were hunting again. Commander Vex kept a recording of the battle in his personal files, along with Elena's final report. Sometimes, when new instructors questioned the inclusion of irregular warfare tactics. In the standard curriculum, he'd show them the footage of a human admiral turning a military academy into a weapons platform. The lesson was always the same: never underestimate humanity's capacity for creative violence. Years later, when alien cadets would ask about the legendary battle at Nexus Prime, Vex would tell them about the quiet human student who sat in the back of his classroom and the maintenance worker who made everyone nervous. He'd explain how 2 humans had defended the academy against impossible odds using nothing but improvised tactics and sheer audacity. But he never told them the most frightening part of the story. 3 months after the battle, long-range sensors detected the wreckage of a Korthak command ship drifting in deep space, 12 systems away from any inhabited planet. The ship showed signs of catastrophic internal damage, but no evidence of external weapons fire. The crew compartments were empty, though life support had been functioning normally until just before the ship was discovered. In the captain's quarters, investigators found a single message burned into the metal bulkhead with what appeared to be a plasma torch. The ghost sends her regards. Elena Cross and Rick Morrison had found their quarry. And somewhere in the outer rim, hostile species were learning the same lesson the Cortac Raiders had learned at Nexus Prime. When humans decide you're a problem, the best thing you can do is stop being a problem very, very quickly. Because humanity doesn't just fight to win. They fight to make sure you never want to fight them again.